The storm had thinned to a cold, needling rain when Mara stepped into the barn, carrying the smell of wet earth and iron on her coat. She moved like someone who had learned to be careful with hope, shoulders drawn inward, eyes scanning for disaster. The horse lifted her head at the sound, ribs sharp beneath mud-dark skin, breath rasping in shallow bursts. Lightning flared beyond the open doors, freezing them together in white silence, two survivors measuring distance. Mara felt the old ache rise, the instinct to retreat, and she stood there anyway. Rain ticked against warped wooden walls. The note was still knotted to the horse's tail, soggy but stubborn, its ink bled thin by rain. Mara reached for it, then stopped, fingers hovering as if the paper might burn. She had learned how quickly promises could turn to weight, how care could become obligation, how endings arrived without warning. The horse shifted, hooves scraping straw, and the small sound broke something open. Mara untied the string, unfolded the paper, and felt the night lean closer, listening with her. Thunder rolled far away, reminding her that storms always returned, patient, persistent, asking what she would choose this time. The message was brief, almost ashamed of itself, yet heavy as a hell breath. Please don't let her die. No signature, no explanation, only a plea pressed into ink. Mara closed her eyes and saw other notes, other rooms, the hospital corridor where silence had learned her name. She folded the paper carefully, as though respect might be a form of mercy. Outside, wind worried the eaves. Inside, the horse watched her, dark eye steady, waiting for an answer no one else would give. Mara inhaled slowly, feeling choice settle like weight across her ribs, and refused to flee again. She brought water warmed on the stove, grain measured by instinct rather than instruction, a blanket smelling faintly of cedar. The horse drank cautiously, then greedily, sighed shuddering as life negotiated another hour. Mara spoke nothing, because words could lie, but her hands learned a gentler language. Each small task quieted the room, stitched minutes together. When the horse finally lowered her head, accepting the blanket, Mara felt a shift, a fragile click inside her chest, as if a door had remembered how to open. Rain eased, and the storm loosened its grip. Night breathed differently after that moment alone. Morning arrived thin and pale, revealing damage and possibility in equal measure. The horse stood, trembling but upright, steam lifting from her back like prayer. Mara noticed the way light caught the animal's scars, old ropes burned into memory, and felt anger bloom without direction. Someone had loved this horse enough to hope, yet not enough to stay. The thought stung. She opened the barn doors wider, letting the world witness what she had chosen, and felt fear answer with resolve. In that widening light, Mara recognized herself, standing and shaking, unbroken for the first time since loss began here. The veterinarian arrived by noon, boots muddy, voice careful, eyes kind. He said the horse was exhausted, not finished, and that difference mattered. Mara listened, nodding, absorbing hope in measured doses. When he left supplies and drove away, silence returned heavier, expectant. The horse followed Mara's movements, learning her shape, her pace. That attention unsettled her more than any diagnosis. It suggested future, routine, return. She leaned against the stall and laughed once, surprised by sound, then steadied herself for responsibility. Outside, a neighbor slowed his truck, curiosity beginning to stir. Something small was already changing beyond fences there too. Days layered themselves gently, care becoming rhythm rather than crisis. Mara brushed mud from the horse's coat, discovering warmth beneath grime, trust beneath fear. At night she slept in the tack room, waking to soft hoof sounds and steady breathing. Dreams shifted, loosening their grip. The horse healed in increments, each improvement modest yet miraculous. So did Mara. She caught herself planning, counting feed, imagining spring. These thoughts frightened her more than storms, because they required belief. Still, she let them stay, testing how hope fit again. Each morning confirmed survival was no longer the only goal worth pursuing fully. The horse took her first steps into the paddock under a rinsed blue sky, ears pricked, body cautious but willing. Mara walked beside her without rope, heart loud, breath shallow. A gust lifted dust and memory together, and for a moment Mara feared collapse. Instead, the horse surged forward, strength answering weakness, and Mara laughed again, louder this time. It felt like standing at the edge of something immense. She realized in the note had not been an ending, but an invitation she was finally accepting. Fear broke apart, replaced by motion, purpose, and fragile joy shared between them equally. News traveled softly, carried by glances and slowed trucks, by the veterinarian's quiet praise. A teenager appeared one afternoon, pretending to fix a fence, eyes lingering on the horse. Mara said nothing, but she did not chase him away. She sensed the shape of need, recognized it. The ranch, once a place of withdrawal, began to breathe outward. This frightened her. Opening doors meant risk, grief, repetition. Yet the horse stood calm beside her, a living argument against retreat, reminding Mara that healing expanded when shared. She rested a hand on warm muscle, choosing courage without certainty guiding her steps. The true test arrived without warning, as tests often do. That evening, the horse stumbled, leg buckling, breath hitching. Panic surged, sharp and familiar, dragging old losses into the present. Mara moved fast, calling the veterinarian, steadying the horse, pressing her forehead to trembling neck. She whispered nothing, but her body promised stay. When the horse righted herself, pain passing like a wave, relief hit hard enough to drop Mara to her knees. In that instant, she understood commitment as something earned through endurance. The storm inside her broke, replaced by fierce resolve that would not abandon living again ever. Night settled clean and quiet. Stars sharp as nails, the world rinse of fear. The horse slept standing, unafraid, weight balanced, breath deep. Mara sat nearby, the note unfolded in her palm, finally light. She saw the path opening, narrow but real, leading beyond survival toward purpose. The choice she had made in the storm now burned steady, a beacon rather than a wound. When the horse shifted closer, sharing warmth, Mara smiled into the dark, knowing this beginning would change many lives, including her own. Thunder echoed distantly, no longer threatening, only applauding the courage she claimed at last. Spring came late, arriving on quiet hooves across the valley, and Mara felt it before she saw it. Frost still rimmed the fences at dawn, yet the air carried promise, thin and persistent. She walked the paddock with the horse beside her, noting stronger steps, brighter eyes, and a patience newly learned by both. Every morning demanded attention, medicine, measured feed, gentle brushing, and steady presence. Every morning answered back, with survival. The ranch no longer echoed. It listened. Mara noticed how her breathing matched the horse's rhythm, how fear loosened, how staying became instinct. Without hesitation or regret today, people began to arrive without announcing themselves, drawn by rumor and need rather than invitation. A veteran with sleepless eyes leaned against the gate, asking only to watch. A girl with restless hands offered apples, then stayed to help. Mara resisted at first, guarding quiet like a fragile resource, but the horse chose otherwise, stepping forward, breathing calm into strangers. Healing revealed itself through contact, through weight shifting, through silence shared. Mara learned leadership without authority, service without sacrifice. She opened the barn, set boundaries, and discovered strength multiplied when trust was permitted to enter slowly from the outside world. With growth came tension, subtle yet unavoidable, as responsibility pressed heavier each day. Supplies cost money. Time thinned. Sleep shortened. Mara felt the old fear return, whispering that collapse followed hope. One evening, the horse refused feed, sides tight, eyes darkening with pain. Panic surged, sharp and fast. The veterinarian's truck took too long. Storm clouds gathered again, circling the valley like memory. Mara worked through shaking hands, cooling skin, steady voice, refusing surrender. When the horse finally eased, breath deepening, Mara wept openly, choosing commitment over retreat again. That night rewrote everything she believed about loss and courage enduring. The breakthrough arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary afternoon light slanting through open doors. A young boy, silence and tragedy hardened him, approached the horse alone. No one guided him. No one interfered. Mara watched from a distance, heart suspended. The horse lowered her head, inviting touch. Small fingers pressed into warm mane. The boy leaned close and whispered her name. Sound cracked the air. Breath stopped everywhere. Tears followed without permission. In that instant, Mara understood the note's true reach. Its hope traveling farther than survival, stitching broken lives together across seasons, storms, and human hearts' long starve for mercy. Afterward, the ranch changed shape, not physically, but in meaning. What began as refuge became practice, repetition, and promise. Veterans slept through nights. Children learned balance, patience, and trust a stride borrowed strength. Mara built schedules, rules, and quiet rituals that honor fragility. She learned to accept help without apology. The horse thrived, muscles filling, coat shining, presence steady. Together they became evidence. Pain was not erased. It was transformed. The note lived folded in Mara's pocket, no longer a plea, but a compass pointing forward. It guided decisions during doubt and exhaustion under relentless pressure. The storm returned one final time, louder than before, battering roofs and nerves alike. Power failed. Roads flooded. Calls went unanswered. The horse grew restless, sensing danger. Mara stayed awake, lantern lit, body between fear and those entrusted to her. Wind screamed history at the walls. Then a tree fell, blocking the drive, trapping them together. Panic rose among visitors. Mara stood firm, voice calm, hand steady. She had been training for this unknowingly. By dawn, the storm passed. Everyone remained safe. The ranch had held. So had she. Strength revealed itself through endurance, and care shared without hesitation together. When calm returned, news spread wider, faster, reaching places Mara never imagined. Donations arrived. Volunteers offered time. Skeptics softened. The ranch grew into something named and recognized, though Mara resisted titles. She preferred listening. She preferred the work. The horse greeted newcomers gently, teacher without words. Mara noticed her own reflection changing. Shoulders squared, gaze open. Grief still lived within her, but no longer alone. Purpose stood beside it, steady and warm. She accepted leadership as stewardship, promising to protect what vulnerability had built through trust and patience earned slowly by shared survival during nights once ruled by fear alone. One evening, Mara finally read the note aloud, alone in the barn. Saying the words released their weight. She imagined the writer, hand shaking, hope trembling but alive. Forgiveness arrived quietly, not dramatic, but complete. Mara placed a note inside a frame, hanging it near the stall. It belonged to the story now, not hidden away. The horse nudged her shoulder, grounding her. Together they watched the sun sink, light turning gold, then blue. Mara felt gratitude without guilt. She had not replaced loss. She had answered it. That distinction saved her from bitterness and allowed joy to remain present. Years later, people would point to the ranch as a miracle, but Mara never did. She spoke of work, patience, and listening. She spoke of choosing again each day. Children grew older and returned. Veterans brought families. The horse aged gracefully, still gentle, still watchful. Mara walked slower, smiled easier. On anniversaries of storms, she stood at the fence, remembering who she had been. Gratitude replaced fear. The land remembered everything. It held footprints, hoofprints, and the proof that courage could be learned, practiced, and passed on through stories shared beside warm fires and hands steady with purpose always onward. On the quietest nights, Mara visited the stall, resting her forehead against familiar warmth. She thanked the horse without speaking. She thanked the unknown rider. Life had not softened, but it had widened. Pain existed, yet meaning surrounded it. Mara understood now that healing did not erase storms. It taught shelter. The ranch slept, safe and breathing. Stars scattered above, indifferent and beautiful. Mara smiled into darkness, no longer afraid of memory. She had become a keeper of beginnings, a witness to change. The note's plea had become her calling, answered daily with care through action, presence, and faith renewed. At sunrise, Mara and the horse stood together at the ridge, watching light spill forward. The valley opened, vast and forgiving. Mara felt whole, not because pain vanished, but because purpose anchored it. She had chosen to stay, to answer a note, to believe again. That choice echoed outward endlessly. The horse shifted closer, breath warm, steady. Mara rested her hand along strong muscle and closed her eyes. Whatever storms waited, she would meet them grounded. This ending was not an ending at all, but beginning held firmly in trust, hope, and enduring care shared freely with the world. Time thinned the way water does over stone, shaping the ranch into something both familiar and new. Seasons passed with deliberate grace, each one leaving behind a quieter version of struggle. Mara moved through her days with practiced steadiness, greeting mornings before the sun cleared the ridge, listening to the land as if it spoke directly to her bones. The horse aged into a presence that felt permanent, her steps slower but certain, her eyes deep with memory. Together they carried history without burden, proof that survival could mature into wisdom rather than bitterness over time. Visitors still came, though fewer sought miracles now. Most arrived looking for permission to rest. Mara learned the difference. She met them with boundaries and patience, understanding that healing did not require spectacle. Children brushed the horse's mane in long, thoughtful strokes. Veterans stood quietly beside the fence, breathing evenly for the first time in years. Mara watched from a distance, resisting the urge to manage outcomes. Trust had taught her restraint. The ranch functioned like a living organism, each part responding to care rather than command, resilient because it remained honest about limits. One afternoon, a woman arrived alone, carrying a folded paper she did not show anyone. Her eyes held the same exhausted hope Mara remembered from storms long past. She asked to walk the paddock. Mara agreed without questions. The horse approached, gentle as ever, breathing calm into the stranger's shaking hands. The woman cried quietly, shoulders folding inward, grief finally finding ground. Mara stayed nearby, offering presence instead of answers. She recognized a moment as sacred, unchanged by time. This was how healing entered lives now, unannounced and patient, guided by listening rather than force or expectation. That night, Mara dreamed of storms that did not threaten. Rain fell softly, feeding roots, shaping futures unseen. She woke with a sense of readiness she had not felt before, as if something was arriving rather than ending. The ranch hummed quietly outside her window. Wind moved through grass without urgency. She dressed slowly, savoring the calm, and walked to the barn where the horse waited, eyes bright despite age. Mara rested her forehead against familiar warmth and felt gratitude stretch wide, touching everything that had grown from a single decision made in fear and courage combined. The letter came weeks later, delivered by mail, addressed in careful script. Mara held it for a long time before opening, recognizing the weight of connection before content. Inside, the handwriting matched the note she had framed years ago. The writer thanked her, spoke of rebuilding, of learning to forgive herself, of choosing life again. There were no explanations, only acknowledgement. Mara sat down, heart full, tears unguarded. The circle closed gently. What began as abandonment revealed itself as trust carried through desperation. Mara folded the letter carefully, placing beside the original note, honoring both as witnesses. With that closure came unexpected restlessness. Mara noticed in her pacing, her thoughts reaching outward. The ranch thrived, sustained by community and rhythm, yet something inside her leaned toward horizon. She walked the ridge often, scanning distance, wondering what staying meant now. The horse followed when she could, stopping to graze content. Mara realized staying no longer meant hiding. It meant choosing presence wherever life asked. The idea frightened and thrilled her equally. Growth had taught her not to flee fear, but to listen to what it invited. The answer arrived through loss that did not devastate, but clarified. One winter morning, the horse did not rise. She lay peacefully, breath shallow, eyes calm. Mara knelt beside her, heart steady despite pain, understanding the language of endings. There was no panic, no bargaining, only gratitude and grief intertwined. She stayed until the breath stilled, whispering thanks without words. The ranch held its silence respectfully. When Mara stood, legs shaking, she felt the weight of love fully and did not resist it. This was the final lesson, offered gently after years of trust. The community gathered without summons. They brought hands, stories, quiet strength. Together they buried the horse beneath an old cottonwood. Earth soft and forgiving. Children placed flowers. Veterans stood watch. Mara spoke briefly, voice firm, honoring a life that had given more than anyone expected. When it was finished, the ranch felt emptier and fuller at once. Loss no longer threatened to undo her. It deepened her. She understood then that legacy was not permanence, but impact carried forward through changed lives and choices made braver because of shared care. In the months that followed, Mara transformed grief into movement. She traveled, visiting places where healing waited, sharing what she had learned without claiming ownership. The ranch continued under trusted hands, its work steady. Wherever Mara went, she carried the story lightly, offering it as possibility rather than proof. She learned that beginnings multiplied when released. Each return home felt earned, grounded, standing beneath the cottonwood. She spoke softly to memory, no longer asking questions. Purpose traveled with her now, portable and resilient, shaped by love rather than fear. On the anniversary of the first storm, Mara stood again at the fence line, wind brushing her face. The valley opened wide, unchanged and generous. She closed her eyes and felt the presence that never truly left, warmth remembered in muscle and breath. She smiled, not because pain had ended, but because it no longer defined her. The note's plea had become a life lived outward, generous and brave. Mara turned back toward the ranch, ready for whatever waited next, carrying forward a truth earned slowly. Healing is not found, it is chosen, again and again, with steady hands and an open heart. The ranch learned how to breathe without her before Mara realized she was ready to let it. Mornings unfolded with familiar sounds, the creak of gates, the low murmur of wind through grass. Yet they no longer asked for supervision. She walked the perimeter slowly, hands in pockets, reading the land like a letter she had memorized. Where fear once tightened her steps, trust now widened them. The cottonwood stood firm against the sky, leaves whispering, roots holding stories. She paused there, grounding herself, acknowledging the shape of absence without turning away from it. She spent that summer teaching others how to listen, not with instructions, but with patience. She showed them how to stand quietly, how to notice a change in breathing, how to let time work without interference. People arrived carrying their own storms, expecting answers. She offered presence instead. The ranch met them halfway, a place that did not demand transformation, but allowed it. Mara discovered that the quiet work continued even when she stepped back. Healing had learned independence. That realization loosened her grip and filled her chest with something like pride, tempered by humility. One evening, a boy she had once watched speak his first word returned as a young man. He stood taller now, voice steady, eyes clear. He thanked her without drama, crediting the ranch for teaching him how to stay when things hurt. Mara listened, absorbing the proof that time had kept its promises. She felt the echo of hooves that no longer sounded, the warmth that still lingered in memory. When the young man left, she remained by the fence, watching dust settle, knowing impact often revealed itself long after the moment passed. Autumn returned with a softer hand. Mara packed lightly, preparing to leave the ranch in capable care. She moved through rooms once heavy with grief, now filled with use and laughter. Each object held a story, but none demanded her stay. She wrote notes for those who would follow, not instructions, but encouragements. Trust your hands. Listen first. Stay longer than fear. Folding the papers, she smiled at how simple the truth had become. What once required survival now asked only faith in process and people. On her final night, she slept beneath the stars, the same sky that had witnessed her first storm-bound choice. Cold air sharpened the world. She dreamed without urgency, images gentle and unforced. When she woke, dawn painted the valley in pale gold. Mara stood, brushing grass from her clothes, breathing deeply. She felt ready in a way that did not need proof. Readiness had arrived through repetition, through staying, through leaving when the time asked honestly. Before departing, She walked once more to the cottonwood. The ground there held more than memory. It held instruction. Love did not end. It changed hands. She placed her palm against bark roughened by years and whispered gratitude, not goodbye. Turning away, she felt no tearing inside her, only expansion. The road waited, open and unthreatening. Mara stepped onto it with calm resolve, carrying what could not be taken, leaving behind what had already multiplied. As she drove, the ranch receded, then disappeared, but its rhythm traveled with her. She recognized it in new places, in stranger silences, in landscapes shaped by endurance. Wherever she stopped, she noticed how listening changed rooms, how patience softened edges. The story no longer belonged to one horse, one note, one storm. It belonged to anyone willing to choose care over retreat. That understanding settled deep, steady as breath. Years later, when asked where it began, Mara never mentioned miracles. She spoke of weather, of paper tied with twine, of staying when leaving felt safer. She spoke of hands learning gentleness, of fear taught to loosen. People listened, some nodding, some unsure. She let the uncertainty be. Stories, she had learned, worked best when they left room for courage to arrive quietly. At the edge of another valley, at the close of another day, Mara stopped her car and stepped out into cooling air. The sky widened, endless and forgiving. She smiled, feeling whole not because life had been kind, but because she had learned how to answer it. Somewhere, a story waited to be heard, another note waiting for hands willing to untie it. Mara breathed in, steady and open, and walked forward, ready to listen again. The work did not announce itself when it returned to her life. It arrived disguised as invitation, as pause, as a subtle leaning forward of the world. Mara began receiving letters again, handwritten, uneven, honest. People asked how to begin when they were afraid, how to stay when leaving felt easier. She answered slowly, choosing words a way she once chose steps in a storm. She told them to notice breath, to notice weight, to notice what asked for care without demanding perfection. In writing, she discovered another rhythm of listening, one that carried her presence farther than fences ever had. She traveled less after that, not from fatigue, but from clarity. Roots had changed meaning. She settled near a small town where land rolled gently and neighbors waved without curiosity. Here, she volunteered quietly, helping where asked, stepping back when not. She learned to recognize the edge between service and self-erasure, guarding it carefully. Experience had taught her that giving only healed when it did not hollow the giver. Each morning, she walked, letting silence speak. Each evening, she rested without guilt. Balance became her new discipline, earned through years of leaning too far in either direction. Sometimes, memory arrived uninvited, a scent of wet hay, the sound of wind through boards. For a breath, grief flickered. Mara did not resist it. She had learned grief was not an enemy, but a messenger reminding her of depth. She let it pass through, leaving behind warmth instead of ache. Loss had reshaped her, but it no longer ruled her movements. She could hold absence and still step forward. This, she realized, was the truest measure of healing, the ability to carry love without being crushed by its ending. One afternoon, she was asked to speak at a small gathering, nothing formal. People sat in folding chairs, hands wrapped around cups, eyes tired but hopeful. Mara stood without notes. She spoke of storms that taught patience, of choices made without certainty, of trust built through repetition. She spoke of the power of staying present when outcomes remained unknown. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. The room leaned toward her anyway. When she finished, silence held them, not empty, but full. She understood then that testimony did not require spectacle. Only truth offered steadily. Afterward, a young woman approached, eyes shining with recognition. She said she was standing at the edge of a decision, afraid to choose either way. Mara listened, nodding, and told her she could begin by choosing care for the next hour. Then the next. The woman exhaled, relief softening her shoulders. Mara watched her walk away lighter, and felt a familiar quiet satisfaction. Change rarely arrived all at once. It entered through small permissions, through moments when fear loosened enough to allow movement. As years layered themselves gently, Mara noticed how her own story receded into background, becoming reference rather than center. She welcomed that shift. Legacy, she had learned, was not about being remembered, but about creating conditions where others could remember themselves. She cultivated spaces, conversations, pauses. She trusted that seeds planted would find their seasons without her supervision. Letting go had become an act of faith rather than loss. On evenings when the sky turned the color of ash and gold, Mara sat outside, wrapped in a worn jacket, watching light change. She felt accompanied, even when alone. The presence she carried was not tethered to place or memory. It lived in posture, in attention, in the way she met uncertainty without retreat. She smiled at how far she had come without rushing. Life, she understood now, was not a problem to solve, but a relationship to tend. When storms rolled through, as they still did, Mara prepared calmly. She secured what needed securing, checked on neighbors, then waited. Wind no longer startled her. Rain no longer felt like warning. Weather had become teacher rather than threat. Each storm passed, leaving clarity in its wake. She welcomed that clarity, using it to refine her choices, to release what no longer served, to step again into the unfolding path. At the close of one long day, Mara stood beneath an open sky, stars emerging one by one. She felt gratitude rise without effort, not gratitude for ease, but for capacity. She had learned how to hold complexity without breaking, how to remain open without dissolving. The note that once asked for mercy had given her a life shaped by response rather than reaction. She breathed deeply, feeling grounded and free at once. Tomorrow would ask something new. She would meet it, as she always had learned to do, with steady hands, listening heart, and the courage to choose care again. The story did not close the way stories often pretend to, with certainty or clean edges. It softened instead, widening into something that could be entered again and again. Mara noticed this on an ordinary morning, when sunlight fell across her kitchen table and stopped her mid-step. Nothing remarkable waited that day. No visitors. No letters, just breath, light, and the quiet knowledge that she was still here. She stood longer than necessary, letting the moment settle, aware that presence itself had become the miracle she once searched for in storms. She walked later through the town, exchanging small greetings, absorbing the texture of familiar faces. People no longer looked at her as a keeper of answers, but as someone who knew how to stand with questions. That felt right. She carried no emblem of what she had built, no title. Her work had taught her that the truest markers of change were invisible, felt rather than displayed. She paused at crossroads and smiled, remembering how fear once narrowed every choice. Now, uncertainty felt spacious, like a field waiting for footsteps. In the afternoon, she received a call from the ranch. A new family had arrived, tentative, asking if staying a while might help. Mara listened, eyes closing, recognizing a familiar shape, a beginning. She did not rush advice. She said yes to the question beneath the question, to the need for a place that did not demand speed. When the call ended, she felt the quiet satisfaction of continuity. What she had helped create no longer depended on her presence to exist. That independence was the truest success she could have hoped for. Memory visited her gently that evening, not as ache, but as warmth. She thought of the horse's steady breath, the weight of a life trusting her hands, the way storms once framed every decision. She understood now that the storm had never been the enemy. It had been the doorway. Without it, she might never have learned how deeply she could choose. That realization brought no sadness, only reverence for the strange generosity of hardship when met without retreat. As dusk settled, Mara stepped outside, the air cooling her skin. The horizon held the last light, stretched thin, patient. She breathed in and felt the familiar alignment of body and intention. She was not waiting anymore. She was participating. Each day offered a chance to answer life without armor, to remain reachable. That reachability had once terrified her. Now it felt like strength refined. She thought of all the unseen moments unfolding elsewhere. Someone untying a note, someone choosing to stay, someone discovering that care could begin even in exhaustion. The story continued through them, unowned, alive. Mara understood she was both part of it and no longer central to it, and that balance filled her with peace. Influence, she had learned, did not require permanence. It required sincerity and the willingness to step aside. Night arrived fully, stars emerging with quiet authority. Mara stood still, hands loose at her sides, feeling the steady pulse of belonging that no longer depended on place or proof. She had become fluent in listening, practiced in choosing care again and again. Whatever came next would meet her prepared, not because she controlled outcomes, but because she trusted her capacity to respond. She turned back toward the lighted doorway, carrying nothing she needed to protect. The past rested where it belonged, honored but not heavy. The future waited without demand. In that space between, Mara moved forward, whole not because everything had been healed, but because she had learned how to heal alongside what could not be changed. The story continued, open and breathing, and she stepped into it willingly, ready to listen, ready to stay, ready to choose. The morning arrived without ceremony, pale light slipping through thin clouds, and Mara felt a quiet anticipation she no longer tried to name. She had learned that meaning rarely announced itself. It revealed itself only after attention was given. She brewed coffee, watched steam rise, and listened to the world wake in small sounds. Somewhere, a door opened. Somewhere, a choice was forming. She sensed it the way she once sensed storms, not with fear, but with readiness shaped by years of listening and staying. She drove back toward the ranch that afternoon, not because she was needed, but because she wanted to see it breathe. The land greeted her without urgency. Fences stood steady. Voices carried lightly on the wind. Children laughed near the paddock, their joy unguarded. Mara watched from a distance, content not to intervene. The work continued, shaped by many hands now, guided by values rather than her presence. She felt no ache at that realization, only gratitude. What endured did so because it had learned how to live beyond her. A young girl noticed Mara and waved, her smile bright and certain. Mara returned the gesture, warmth spreading easily through her chest. The exchange felt symbolic, a quiet confirmation that connection did not require proximity or control. She walked the familiar paths slowly, fingertips grazing weathered wood, sensing layers of memory without being pulled into them. The cottonwood stood unchanged, leaves trembling softly. She paused there, honoring the stillness, understanding that remembrance and forward motion could coexist without conflict. Inside the barn, the air held echoes of countless quiet moments. Mara stood where she once slept on a tackroom floor, heart knotted with fear and resolve. The space felt larger now, open, purposeful. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting appreciation rise without grief attached. She understood then that healing was not a destination reached, but a relationship maintained. It required presence, humility, and the courage to release what no longer belonged to the present moment. As evening approached, a small gathering formed near the fence. People sharing food, stories, and silence in equal measure. No one asked Mara to speak. No one needed explanation. She sat among them, another listener, another witness. In that circle, she felt the full arc of her journey, without revisiting pain. Belonging had replaced isolation. Contribution had replaced survival. The shift was subtle but complete. When the stars appeared, someone lit a lantern, its glow soft and steady. Mara watched faces illuminated briefly, then fading back into shadow. She thought of a note once tied to a trembling tale, of the hands that had written it in desperation, of the moment she chose to stay. That choice had echoed farther than she ever could have planned. It had not made her exceptional. It had made her available. Availability, she realized, was where transformation began. Later, alone again, Mara walked to the edge of the paddock and looked out across the darkened land. Wind moved gently through grass, carrying the familiar rhythm of endurance. She felt no need to hold on, no urge to rush ahead. Life had taught her its tempo, and she had learned to follow it faithfully. Whatever storms might come would be met the same way the first had been. With attention, with care, with the courage to remain present when retreat seemed easier. She turned toward home under a sky scattered with quiet light, her steps unhurried, Her hands relaxed. The story did not ask for closure. It asked for continuation. Mara smiled, accepting the invitation. Somewhere, another life waited at the edge of a decision. Somewhere, a note waited to be untied. And Mara, shaped by all she had lived, walked forward knowing that when the moment came, she would answer, not perfectly, but willingly, with an open heart and steady resolve. The years that followed did not rush her. They settled around Mara like a familiar coat, worn smooth by use, shaped by weather and choice. She learned to recognize the difference between movement and progress, between noise and meaning. Each day offered small invitations to notice, to pause, to respond rather than react. She accepted them quietly. The world no longer felt like something happening to her. It felt like a conversation she was finally fluent in. She spent more time walking now, letting her feet choose direction before her mind intervened. Fields opened and closed around her, skies shifting color with the patience of something unconcerned with urgency. When she met strangers, she listened without trying to fix them. When she spoke, she chose words that left space. This restraint felt earned. Once, she had believed care required constant effort. Now she understood it also required trust. Trust that what was planted would grow without her standing over it. Occasionally, she returned to the ranch for longer stays. Each visit revealed new layers, a child taller than memory, a veteran laughing more easily, a routine refined by practice. The place carried on, not as a monument, but as a living rhythm. Mara worked alongside others when needed, stepped back when not. Leadership had softened into stewardship, stewardship into belonging. She felt no ownership, only responsibility shared. That balance kept her light. One afternoon, as clouds gathered low and gray, a storm threatened the valley again. People prepared calmly, securing doors, checking animals, moving together without panic. Mara watched with quiet pride. This was what endurance looked like when learned collectively. When rain finally fell, it did so steadily, without violence. She stood beneath the eaves, letting mist cool her skin, remembering the first storm that had changed everything. Fear did not return. Only gratitude did. As evening deepened, she found herself alone near the fence line, the land stretching wide and forgiving. She thought of how many lives had intersected here, how many choices had been shaped by a single moment of staying. The realization did not inflate her sense of self. It humbled her. Influence, she had learned, was rarely about intention. It was about availability, about being present when presence was hardest. Later that night, under a sky scattered with stars, Mara felt a quiet completeness settle in her chest. Not an ending, but a fullness that needed no next step to justify itself. She had learned how to live with open hands, how to hold joy without bracing for loss, how to meet pain without letting it define the future. These were not lessons she could teach directly. They had to be lived, chosen again and again. She understood now that stories did not belong to the teller. They belonged to those who recognized themselves inside them. Somewhere, someone would hear of a ranch, a storm, a note tied with twine, and feel something shift. Someone would choose to stay. Someone would discover that healing could begin without certainty. That knowledge felt enough. Mara turned toward the path ahead, steps unhurried, heart steady. The night welcomed her, without demand. Whatever waited next would be met the same way everything meaningful had been met, with attention, patience, and the courage to remain. The story continued, not as something finished, but as something alive, breathing through countless lives. And she walked on, ready to listen, ready to answer, knowing that sometimes the smallest choice becomes the widest door. Dawn broke slowly, silver and soft, spilling light across the hills in gentle strokes. Mara stepped outside, feeling the chill settle into her bones, familiar and grounding. She breathed deep, savoring the quiet that now seemed permanent, earned rather than given. The ranch stretched before her, alive in small, unnoticed ways. Leaves trembling in wind, birds tracing arcs through pale sky, the faint scent of hay and earth mingled with morning frost. She had walked these fields countless times, yet each step felt renewed, as if the land itself was teaching her patience one footfall at a time. She moved toward the paddock, hands brushing over the fence rails, with worn smooth by time and countless touches. Her mind traced the years, the storms, the notes, the lives touched quietly, invisibly. Children grown taller than memory, veterans sleeping soundly for the first time in decades, strangers learning that care could be offered without demand. She felt their presence here, not physically, but in rhythm and breath, as if the ranch carried them like roots carry water silently underground. Mara smiled, acknowledging the quiet proof of endurance, of choices made and kept, of love returned in subtle, lasting ways. Visitors still came occasionally, seeking guidance, seeking refuge. Mara met them without expectation, offering presence instead of answers. She had learned that transformation did not need instruction, only availability. People responded naturally when they sensed someone willing to stay beside them, without judgment. She showed them how to move, how to pause, how to witness, how to hear the silent questions in a hesitant hand or a lowered gaze. Healing, she understood, was not a series of heroic acts. It was a rhythm of attention, repeated daily, quietly, until change took root. Afternoons passed slowly in calm observation. Mara watched the young ones care for animals, mimic her gentle touch, learn to wait, and learn to trust. Veterans lingered near fences, exhaling slowly, discovering patience they had lost long ago. Mara did not intervene unless needed, recognizing that her presence mattered most when she held back, when she allowed the work of care to imprint on their hands and hearts rather than her authority. This was a culmination of years spent learning the language of endurance, the understanding that influence comes not from direction, but from steadiness, not from control, but from witness. Evenings brought light that bent low and gold across the fields. Mara walked slowly, letting shadows stretch behind her, listening to the wind whisper through the cottonwood's rough bark. She remembered the first storm, the note tied to trembling fur, the horse who had trusted her despite fear. Memory no longer pierced with grief. Instead, it resonated with gratitude and quiet pride. The smallest decision, the choice to stay, had expanded far beyond its origin, becoming a network of lives held together by unseen bonds. She understood now that miracles rarely arrive loudly. They move quietly, through persistence, attention, and choice. Night came fully, stars scattering across the black sky, like scattered promises kept. Mara stood by the fence, arms loose, eyes soft, heart steady. She imagined the many lives she had touched, and the many more still waiting for quiet guidance. Somewhere, someone would untie a note, open a door, stay when leaving felt easier. The story she had helped shape was no longer hers alone. It breathed freely, alive in others' choices, resilient without her constant intervention. She felt the depth of that truth, and it filled her chest with warmth, not weight. As she turned back toward the house, she felt ready for what would arrive next, ready for uncertainty, ready for responsibility, ready for absence and presence intertwined. Mara had learned that readiness was not the absence of fear, but the courage to continue despite it, the willingness to remain available, patient, and steady. She had learned that impact is born of presence, not intention, that healing grows in spaces shaped by trust, not urgency. She paused at the threshold of the door, hands brushing wood lightly, feeling the texture of years, memory, and care. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of bread baking, coffee brewing, life continuing in ordinary, steady rhythms. Mara smiled, her gaze drifting past the room to the paddock, the fields beyond, the hills fading into horizon. She had built nothing permanent, yet everything meaningful. She had answered the call when it arrived in ink, mud, and breath. She had stayed. The wind rose again, soft, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. Mara inhaled, full and calm, and stepped forward. She knew the story did not end here. It would continue, endlessly, quietly, through lives she would never see, through choices she could never control, through hope offered without demand. And she walked on, open, ready, willing. Presence became her answer, courage her companion, and love, steady, persistent, resilient, her legacy. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear a story even more miraculous than this one. You'll cry and then feel whole again. Click it now, we'll be waiting.